you, thank you. Hello, everybody. I gotta say, Canada's fantastic, but the weather over here is just a little bit more pleasant. You know, I left home, it was minus 22 with about 1.5 meters of snow. Came here, it's plus 30 with about 1.5 meters of sand. Gotta say, it's a much better scenario.
That was sweet.
So I work for a really, really cool company that makes really fun toys, as you can tell. And, you know, just to quickly introduce myself, my name is David. As you've heard, I've been with BRP for the last roughly a year, having a lot of fun, but I've been in the data space for over 20 years, my entire career. Kind of fell into data accidentally. I really wasn't sure what I was doing at the beginning 20 years ago. Nobody really thought data was cool, but hey, I got into it and I still love it. I studied actually in business, so I'm more of the business back end with, you know, international business exposure, commerce as what was driving me, except that anything that's amazing to do with business is enabled by technology and therefore driven by data. So everything kind of got connected for me, which is really cool. I went back to school, I got an executive MBA just for fun. I spent over 10 years in consulting, doing many different jobs. I went into coding, I went into artificial intelligence. I went for a company called the Aldo Group, which is a fashion footwear company. Spent 6 years over there implementing a data governance framework, developing artificial intelligence practices for them, launching really cool data and AI projects. Then I went into the video game industry, because video games are fun. And it was a great time to be in the video game industry during COVID because everybody was home playing video games. So I did that for a couple of years, led an international group, over 150 data professionals across the world, left the video game, went to BRP, learning a lot of really cool stuff at BRP, which is, as you saw, multiple brands, Ski-Doo, Can-Am, Sea-Doo, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm always learning, and I'm here to learn. And I'm also here to share my learnings. I teach at university. So I'm a university professor back in Canada, in Montreal, and I teach artificial intelligence, data analytics, governance, and all those fun topics to a fantastic group of students that are always trying to learn as well. So you share, you learn, you grow. That's the professional me. The personal me, and yes, it does matter sometimes a little bit more than data. I like to do my own renovations. So I go and I build my own walls and destroy buildings and start them up again, but I also love to cook, even though you can still see I'm wearing my renovation clothes, but hey, whatever. My wife thought it was cute, so scored me some brownie points. And I have an absolutely amazing family, 2 beautiful little boys, a wonderful, very patient and understanding wife who lets me travel to Dubai while she is at home in the snow with our 2 kids, driving them to school. So yes, patient and understanding. This is the boy that poses properly for pictures. This is the guy that no matter what I do, he will not let me take a normal picture of him. But he's really cute, so I love him. But we're not here to talk about my family and my kids. We are here to talk about data. We are here to talk about data strategies. We are here to talk about how we can disrupt our organization with a fresh data strategy. So how do you get started? How do you kick off your data strategy journey? Well, I can tell you one thing. It is not by doing it alone. It is not me walking into a company or my company and saying, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know data. I'm a teacher. I know data. The fact is your company has its own culture, has its own experiences, has gone through a growth and a learning and a transformation all of its own. And you need to learn about that and surround yourself with what your industry is and what your company does and how it breathes. So when I joined BRP, and I did the same thing at Aldo and at Ubisoft and when I was in consulting, there's that first 90-day period when you kick off at a new company or when you're kicking off on a new project where, first of all, you're kind of like the new guy, so everybody forgives you for asking the stupid questions. But it is good to ask those questions because that's how you learn. So how do you do this? Well, my first 90 days were spent meeting with people at all levels of the organization that touched data. They could have been the intern that was here for 2 months building a report for a director, all the way up to the CEO of the organization. And I did that exactly at BRP. I met with over 70 people trying to learn and understand what's going on. And just for info, BRP is about 15,000 people across the world. So I met, different leaders and different people within the organization, whether they were locally based in Montreal, which is where I am, which is where our headquarters are, all the way to people that are in Austria, because we have offices in Austria and in Finland and in many other countries, Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. I took over 100 pages of notes just asking questions. Some of those interviews were very structured, where I had questions set up and I was getting the answers that I was looking for. Others were just conversations, trying to understand what their realities are, what their business imperatives are, what their objectives are for their function. And that was super important because it helped me understand what were the opportunities within my organization. What are those business opportunities we're trying to solve for, we're trying to reach? And how does data help us reach those objectives and those opportunities? So I learned a lot because it's still always about the learnings. So after doing that, I decided that, hey, maybe it's also a good opportunity while I'm sitting with these people to educate them and teach them a little bit about the world of data. Because you'd be surprised at how many people think they understand data, but they just don't understand where data comes from. Everybody wants to do the fancy AI stuff. I do too. I teach it. I love it. It's sexy. It's fun. But the truth is, there's a lot that comes before that. And first of all, anything that happens with data is triggered by an event. A customer that clicks on your website or mouses over a picture or spends time looking at something, submits a survey, those are events that happen in our business lives. Now, we need, as companies, to identify the events that connect back to our business strategy. So let's say I have a strategic objective that's about better understanding my customer behavior. So an event would be a customer clicking on a product. I need to identify that that data point is important and track it by putting a tag on my website. But then I also need to go and gather that data. And gathering that data will imply cleaning it, organizing it, structuring it, consolidating it along with the other data entities that I'm going to need and want to use to better understand my customers. All that to build this querying layer that my teams, my people, my employees, my colleagues are then going to leverage in order to do three things. Thing number one, analyze the data, to interpret results, and to derive insights. Why do we do those three things? In order to inform business decisions. Super common stuff, you guys all know this, you're all data people. That's the truth. When you're talking to other people in your organization who are not from the data space, they only see those three buckets at the top. This is what they're exposed to. This is what, and I apologize for anybody who's a vendor, but this is what the vendors sell us. They sell us that fun stuff, telling us in 6 weeks, you got your forecasting model ready to go. Sure. Guess what? You got 80% of the workload. That's not part of those 6 weeks. So anybody can spit out an algorithm, but you got a lot of work to be able to get up to that level. So I use this slide in every single one of my presentations with every single one of my executives. Why? It's simple, but I can tell a story behind it. And it's all about storytelling at the end of the day, right? Going through all of these journeys, what we discover is that we all face the same challenges in data. No common definitions and standards. I didn't invent this. You guys are probably facing it. I faced it in every single company that I worked at. Siloed teams with different ways of working and trying to do analytics. Data literacy is sparse. Some pockets are brilliant in analytics and data literacy. Some pockets can't tell you the difference between a histogram and a bar graph. That's the reality. Lacking in data governance, as just about every organization, because it sounds heavy and bureaucratic, but believe me, it is the basis of anything you can do. And there's a lot of time being spent on manual data preparation. That 80% of the work that's being done is painful and slow. Now, I can't solve everybody's problem in a couple slides in a few minutes, but I really want to talk about organizational models. And the reason why is because that's the foundation of how you're going to structure your data teams. The same way we have the CFO structuring their organization and we have the CMO structuring their for marketing, we need to do the same thing for data. And as it relates to data, it's kind of gone all over the place because nobody's ever figured out the magical solution. And by the way, there is no silver bullet. There is no magical solution. So I will not solve all of your problems with this presentation, but at least it can kick off the conversation and maybe it'll give you some ideas as to where to go and the questions to ask. And I'm here anyways for the rest of the day. I have to go back to the snow and tomorrow I gotta remove it from my car, but I am still here for the rest of the day. So if anybody else has questions, I'll be around. So let's talk about the different organizational structures that we've seen in data and in other departments. The decentralized model is one that typically shows up at the beginning. You got a department that hires a data scientist because it's cool. You got another team that hires a couple report developers because they want them. That's usually how it starts, that's how it kicks off, but it's very siloed. It's very siloed, and so there's a lot of negatives to this situation. Whereas people are working in their silos, we lack standards, we don't have visibility on how much we're actually spending on data and analytics because it's kind of hidden in all of these departmental budgets. Best practices, I don't even know what those are when you're in a silo, right? Because nobody really speaks the same language. However, there is still good to it. The truth is, it's so close to the business, it is so embedded in the business that you speak the business language, that you understand the business. You're there driven by the business priorities and objectives, and it's flexible and agile for all intents and purposes. It's difficult to argue that point. The point is, though, is that it doesn't really work in the long run. The cons outweigh the pros. So then companies gravitate more to a centralized model where your data office solidly owns everything that is related to the data teams. And you solve some of the problems. You have a strong, central, coordinated organization, which is fantastic. Your best practices are enforced because you can. You know how much you're spending on analytics. It is better controlled. You have economies of scale because you don't have 12 teams buying 12 different reporting tools. You can consolidate your licenses, negotiate with your friendly vendors, et cetera, et cetera. But the cons and the kind of middle cons, if you will, aren't that great. Because your priorities are managed centrally, because you're dispatching resources to service projects, you end up by losing that business savviness in the team. You lose that proximity. You become a ticket-taking agency where people are going to submit a ticket and then maybe in 2 weeks they'll get an answer. Painful, slow, not exactly what we're looking for in terms of data responsiveness. Really, it's about striking a balance. We need to find a way to balance those things between the consultant mindset of a central organization to being deeply involved, between the lack of objectivity because you report to a business unit, so are you biased in the way you're doing your analysis, to just being so disconnected that you don't even understand what the business is doing or meant to be doing. Between the bureaucracy of ticket-taking and structures and priorities to the actual efficiencies, between the redundancies of having so many silos to the actual effectiveness of being quick to deliver. The silo versus the big picture. we need to strike a balance in between those realities. And this is where a federated model comes in. This is what I've been preaching and deploying at the companies where I work. And it works. The federated model brings you an enormous amount of pros. It actually takes the pros of a central organization, it takes the pros of a decentralized organization and combines them. You get the proximity to the business, but you also have the enforcement of governance. You get your economies of scale, but you have the flexibility to fail fast and try. This is where we need to go as organizations driving data. And what we see in the industries is that over time, companies will naturally gravitate from decentralization to centralization to a federated model. What I'm saying is let's skip the middle step. What is the point of going through that centralization, spending a few years in it, to then go naturally to the decentralization? I've gone through all three steps in a previous employer. It's not a lot of fun because you're going one way, then you're going another way, which is completely like pendulum opposite, to come back to something in the middle. So let's try and jumpstart that reality. Let's try and jumpstart that revolution by moving to a federated model. But the federated model is not everything. I think it can be better. I think it can be better, and the answer is yes, it is definitely going to be better, using a domain-driven architecture, domain-driven strategy. But what does that mean? What is a domain-driven strategy? Well, this is how I built my strategy, and those are the key elements, the 4 critical elements in order to be successful with data and analytics. The first one is to structure yourself, as I mentioned, in data domains, and we'll talk about data domains in a second. I'll just go into it a little bit more. But ultimately, organize yourself as a function of data, not as a function of your organizational structure, because your organizational structure will change through time. Data will remain data. Go for a modern data platform. We'll talk about that a little bit as well later, but a cloud-based consumption model data platform. Let's evolve, let's try something better and newer. It is fundamental that data cataloging, data discoverability becomes at the core of it, because if you have multiple different data domains, you want people to be able to find the data assets that they need. You want that data to be governed. You want that data to be structured. And to do that, you need a data catalog. You need a data architecture that stands. You need standards that can be reused across. Why? Because data interoperability and data discoverability are key to this strategy. So what's a data domain? Well, a data domain is a group, it's a team that covers a specific data entity. Let's say sales, or let's say customer. Customer is a domain of data within which you can do analytics in and of itself and drive value. But you may also want to take that data domain and connect it to, I don't know, manufacturing data to understand the product and the customer. In that case, you need interoperability. That's where your data domains become connected. And that's how you're going to be focusing more on the data, less on the business teams. The customer data will always be customer data. The customer experience team may change names next week, may be regrouped under marketing, maybe moved to analytics, maybe moved to digital, maybe don't focus just on your org structure. Focus on your data, what's enabling your organization. The data teams are responsible to create your data assets, and therefore they need to be independent from beginning to end. They have to have the autonomy. They need to be multidisciplinary teams. So they are part of a larger web of teams, all interconnected by data. They're responsible for the creation of your data asset, your data products, so to speak. The discoverability, so making sure you have the right metadata to identify what's what. To ensure that you have governance, guess what? Governance is key. Because if you don't have the right standards, if you don't have the right governance, if you don't have the right quality, none of what you're building matters. And I've got plenty of stories later if you guys want to talk about it, plenty of stories where I've seen fantastic AI just go wrong because of bad data. And I'm sure we've all heard plenty of them as well. So they're responsible for all of that. However, one thing they are not responsible for is deciding themselves what the priorities are. We have business involvement in there. And that's the difference in between a central org that decides on everything they do versus a federated data domain team that is there to support business towers and business objectives and business strategies. So what does this look like? Well, again, based on a standard architecture, data governance, auditability, and security, we expose a platform with data in it to those teams. And that platform is a grouping of different tools, whether it's your warehousing in your lake, whether it's your data science platform, whether it's your reporting tool, doesn't really matter. But we're exposing that and we're making it available so that the domain team number one can go in and leveraging those tools, leveraging those standards, they can go in and they can architect, ingest, build, develop, standardize, make available the data assets and the data products for their domain. And we're going to have the same thing across multiple domains. You'll have a sales domain, a customer domain, a marketing domain, a finance domain, whatever. You need to figure out what that level of granularity is that makes sense for your organization. And then across, though, you have teams that run analytics. Those teams can then connect to each and every one of those data domains and run their own analytics. Why? Because we have data interoperability and we have data discoverability available throughout the domains. And you may have multiple different teams like those. The idea is to enable data transformation for the organization through a proper, trusted data ecosystem. But you know what you can't do this with? Any thoughts? Your grandfather's data org. Your grandfather's data platform. It's time to, like, evolve a little bit, right? Let's challenge the way we do things. It's more fun. So yeah, let me talk to you about data warehousing. I'm sure none of you know what data warehousing is, of course, right? No, nobody here knows what data warehousing is, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but you all know that. And by the way, I use those slides also when I'm presenting to my execs because I find that they kind of tell a cute little story. You know how back in the days, in the 80s, 90s, late 90s, the data warehouse was really like the king of the world, and everything fit in nice little boxes, and everything was structured and organized, and everybody loved it. And then came the data lake, and all that stuff just no longer fit in little boxes because we had unstructured data. And then everybody's like, oh, but you need a data lake, and you need a data warehouse. And then the vendors were telling you, well, you can use my data lake technology to build your data warehouse. And then the data warehouse companies were saying, hey, you can use my data warehouse technology to build your data lake. Am I the only one that finds this a little bit weird? Because this is what we fell into. My data warehouse sank at the bottom of the lake. It was not cool. This guy's smiling, but that's probably because he found the piece of data he was looking for. The truth is, try finding data in that kind of a mess, that ungoverned disaster. So what am I saying here? Well, we need to evolve. And I'm going with this concept of sharing your data. And sharing your data is, again, that platform that's based on those 4 basic fundamental standards, plus those different pieces that, the discoverability and the interoperability and et cetera, et cetera. So we're exposing this data platform. And what we're doing with this data platform, and you notice I'm not saying data warehouse, I'm saying data platform. I'm not saying data lake, I'm saying data platform. Again, shift in how we talk about the whole ecosystem of data. So we have domain team number 5, and they're responsible for ingesting, transforming, and architecting all of that fantastic data. So they do that in their own data node. Their data node is built on top of our platform, so they have their own environment where they do this. They then make it exposable through APIs, through gateways, through a central layer. Doesn't really matter. You'll decide what the best way is for your team. But they make it available where all of the other domain teams do the same thing. So domain, remember, sales or marketing or HR. And the data that is there is now interoperable and crossable. And that's great because now we have source domains coming together with consistent, clean, and organized data. And what do we do with that? Well, we want to drive innovation. This is what this whole conference is about. Driving innovation and trying to skip a couple steps, trying to get us a little further down the path. So we want to drive innovation. We take our source data platform, and then what do? Well, we have all of these great business teams. You remember those that go across, that access the data that our data domain teams exposes? Well, they have their own little data labs, another little data node. It is theirs. They can go in there and they can explore. And they can do anything they want in there. It is a laboratory for exploration. They can connect to whichever one of the data domains to which they have the access and the security rights and all that stuff, obviously, but they can go and connect to those things and access the data in a virtual way because we don't want to go and duplicate and triplicate again and again the data. But they do that. And now you have multiple teams that start to build data products on trusted data that's built on an ecosystem that scales to support our organizations. That's governed, that's quality, that's controlled but flexible and agile. So we have this whole federation, not only of people, but of data, of platforms, and of structure. The consumption teams, the sourcing teams. Those are really the different domains that you have in this model. So I'm going to leave you guys, but I'm going to be here, like I said, for the rest of the day. But before leaving you guys, just a few thoughts. It is okay to change. It is okay to be uncomfortable in that change because guess what? Change is uncomfortable, but it is important because that's how we challenge ourselves. That's how we challenge our organizations to become better. Try and think about tomorrow. Don't build for today. Don't build for next week. Build for the future. When you're setting up your organization and your platforms, think about what's coming next. Don't just stay with the status quo. Build for value. Those business strategies, those business objectives, we don't do tech just for tech. It's cool, it's fun, but if it's not driving any business value, then in all honesty, it's really not that worth it. Don't over-centralize. Don't over-decentralize. Try and federate, find that middle ground that works for your organization. Don't forget, the culture of your organization is key. So listen to it, understand it, learn it, adapt to it. Your country is going to be different than somebody else's country. Your culture is going to be different from somebody else's culture. Your company, even within your company, you will have departmental cultures that are going to be different. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. Feel free to add me to any communication channel that you wish. I will always be here, and I will always be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been great.